Welcome to Chapter 1, Seeing the City. The big idea in this chapter is that cities are no accident. They're a part of God's plan for humanity, but it takes eyes to see it. In this primary chapter, you will be introduced to the fundamental ideas and key concepts of an urban theology. These will include an exploration of cities and the urban context as demonstrated in Scripture, along with historic and contemporary theological reflections on the urban environment. Together, we're going to explore how we see cities as a means of God's grace, not accidents, but a part of His plan. You will explore your own city as God's work, and thus begin to embrace the city as His playground, rather than the battleground that we often experience. We'll learn about a theology of the city from Ray Bakke, and walk through the Pauline letters to learn how Paul himself engaged the cities he ministered to, and how he contextualized his encounters with each city in their own way, and how we might learn from that. We'll also begin to examine what we mean when we talk about charity and change. Here's what I want you to consider as you walk through the content. Think about how you or your church or community has been incarnated in your city. What has worked, and what might you be able to do better?
My name is Amy Sherman, and I'm greeting you today from Charlottesville, Virginia. Congratulations to each of you for being part of Charity to Change. I love this initiative because I'm really passionate about seeing churches vibrantly, robustly, effectively involved in their communities, being agents of blessing, being agents of flourishing in those communities. So kudos to you for joining this initiative. I hope that what you have already experienced has been illuminating and inspirational and of great practical benefit. And I hope and pray that my session as well will prove to be of practical benefit to you. Let me say a quick word about myself so you know who it is that's going to be talking with you during this session. I see myself as a minister to ministries. That is my sense of calling. For 25 plus years, I have had the great opportunity of coming alongside of congregational leaders and nonprofit ministry leaders, trying to help them do what they do even better. And I've written all kinds of toolkits and created all sorts of tools to help churches in community ministries. I've written several books that have some bearing on these issues. And I do all kinds of trainings and have taught for CCDA conference and a variety of other conferences all along the way. I also know a little bit about what it's like to be in your shoes. I served on staff at a church for several years as the director of urban ministries, and in that role had the opportunity to create and implement a church-based community ministry that is actually still going to this day. It's called Charlottesville Abundant Life Ministries. So I can feel a little bit of what you experience as church leaders who are desirous of seeing your flock mobilized and your church really being an agent of blessing and an agent of flourishing in your community. One of the things that I like about this Charity to Change program is that it teaches you a bit about asset-based community development, or what we sometimes call the ABCD paradigm. I'm a big fan of ABCD and am just thrilled that you are already learning how to strengthen your skills in listening to what's happening in the community, learning more about what God is already doing in your community through all sorts of different churches and ministries. That's just so important. In order to be effective in our own church-based ministry, we need to know what others are doing. We need to explore where there might be potential partnerships. We want to avoid duplication and possibly fill in needed gaps in services. So it's just great that you're doing that community mapping. ABCD also helps us with something really important, which is that it gets us in the right perspective on the folks that we want to be serving. We have people in mind, right, for different types of community initiatives, folks that will hopefully benefit from what we're doing or participate in a particular ministry initiative. And we don't want to see those people as though they were solely constituted by their needs, right? They are not. They have needs and they have assets, just as we have needs and we have assets. And ABCD helps us to make sure we are inquiring about the gifts and the skills, the life experiences and the talents that are possessed by the very people with whom we want to be doing ministry, because they are participants in their own empowerment, and often they are the frontline army of who God wants to use to be involved in the empowerment of their own communities. So I love that you've already begun this task of listening to and learning your community. And it's a time-consuming thing. It's something you need to be intentional and deliberate about, but it's really, really important work. And what we're going to do in this session is kind of the flip side of that work. And what we're going to do also requires intentionality, being deliberate. It's going to require an investment of time and energy. But just as you've been trying to learn well what the assets in the community are, so you need to really attend to the issue of what are the assets that are in your own congregation, and how can those assets be understood, be counted, be effectively stewarded, be effectively leveraged and deployed in your community mission. And so that's what we are going to spend time focused on. And to just get us kind of in the right mindset for that, I wanted to begin with a story from Exodus chapters 3 and 4. It's a familiar passage. You have probably heard teaching on it. It's when God comes to Moses in the burning bush and basically commissions him and calls him. God says to Moses, I've chosen you to be the one who's going to lead my people Israel out of slavery in Egypt. And Moses's response to that call is to be quite, nervous and overwhelmed, perhaps understandingly so. It is a rather big commission that he's being given. And so God, Moses has questions for God about, well, who am I that I could do that? And God's response to him is, Moses, I will be with you in the doing of this work. And that is a really important thing for Moses to hear. But even after he hears that, Moses still has, questions, right? The bottom line is that Moses is not confident that he really has what it takes to do this mission. And I think that we often, share that same fear. And as we think about ways that our congregation can be more involved in our communities, trying to address the pains in our communities, we too can sometimes feel like, do we really have what we need? Do we have the supply that we need for faithfully undertaking that mission? And I think God's encouraging word to us is similar to what he said to Moses. The first thing he said was, I will be with you. And so I want you to hear that today. As you go forth into new ventures, into trying some new things, into maybe launching some new initiatives, God will be with you. You are not alone in doing this. But God goes beyond this with Moses, because Moses continues to sort of hem and haw and suggest that he doesn't have all that he needs. And you'll remember that God asked Moses a question. God said to Moses, what do you have in your hand? And what Moses had in his hand was a staff. And God said, throw that staff down. And when he did, it turned into a snake, which would freak us out, right? I'm sure it freaked out Moses. And then even worse, God then says, pick it up. So he picks it up, and it transforms from a snake back into the staff. And so God very graciously, basically does a miracle for Moses, right? And shows Moses what it means that God is going to be with him. And I think that the bottom line moral of the story for us is that God is saying, I have placed much in your hands. And really, this workshop is about trying to, as comprehensively as possible, answer that question. What is it that God has placed in your hands? So at this point, I want to invite you to pull out the handouts, because you're going to want to have some of these worksheets in front of you as we go through the presentation. The first worksheet that you're going to work on is the one that's called Mapping the Church's Institutional Assets. So if you want to go ahead and pull that out so that you have that ready. I like to call this exercise the 360-degree inventory, because what we're going to do in this workshop is we're going to take a look at your congregation's institutional assets. We're going to take a look at your congregation's story, and we're going to spend most of our time looking at your congregation's human capital assets. And in the second part of the training, we're going to really kind of do a deep dive into that, asking how the gifts and talents of your people can be most strategically deployed in various forms of ministry. So go ahead now and have in front of you that first worksheet about the institutional assets of your church. And on the worksheet that you have, you'll see that there are 4 different kinds of assets that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the church's programs, the church's physical assets, the financial assets of the church, and finally the relational assets of the church. And as we go through this, I'm going to invite you to pause the video after we go through each part and begin brainstorming what you have and how those things might be leveraged in any kind of new outreach ministry that the church begins to get involved in. So the first thing that we want to take a look at are the programs of the church. Now, I don't know what the programs of your churches are, but I'm pretty sure that you have different things. Most churches have Sunday school. Many churches have a summer VBS program. Many churches have youth ministries, women's ministries, men's ministries. There may be special programs that you do at different times of the year. Perhaps you have a special marriage enrichment weekend that you do. Maybe you do the Alpha course. Maybe you provide a Crown Ministries class on finances or the Financial Peace University. What you're going to do is look at the programs that you already run in the church, and you're going to ask yourself some questions about those. So in the first column of the worksheet, you're simply going to make a listing of the different programs that already exist. And here you're probably going to want to, take out an extra piece of paper, basically, and kind of recreate this grid that's on the worksheet, and create many, many more rows, because you may come up with, 5 or 10 or 15 different programs or ministries that the church has. So you're going to list all those things out, and then you're going to ask some questions about those particular existing ministries. And the first question is listed there in the first column. And that is the question, is there any way in which this program is currently being used for community benefit? So, for example, if you have a summer VBS program, maybe right now the only folks in the VBS are the families from your own church. So right now it's not really being used for community benefit. But maybe your VBS program is actually quite outreach oriented, and it's for kids of families that attend your church, but it's also for other kids that aren't part of your church. And so that's a way in which that program is being used for community benefit. Now, all of the little spaces on the worksheet are far too small for you to do much writing, which is why I'm suggesting you have an additional notepad or pieces of paper. But you're going to ask yourself, for each of these different ministry programs, yes or no, is it being used in some way that benefits the community, or is it only a program that is serving the church? If it is benefiting the community in some way, you're going to make a short description. You're going to write down a short description of what that is. If your answer is no, we have a women's ministry, but no, it is not currently really used for community benefit, then you're going to ask the question, well, could it be? Could you imagine a way that it could be transformed into a ministry that could benefit the community? And if that is possible, then you're going to go to the final question, which is, well, how might it be? What might we have to do to modify the current programming so that it benefits not only people in our own congregation, but also becomes something that could benefit people in the community? So that's what you're going to do as you go through and think about the programs of the church. Is it a program that right now is being used for community benefit? If so, how? And if not, could you imagine it being used for community benefit, and what might that look like? So I invite you now to pause the video and begin to sketch out some answers. Don't try to do the entire exercise, but just as part of watching this video together, stop for 5 minutes and have some discussion, and begin to maybe fill out at least 1 or 2 rows on the worksheet. All right, now the second part, after we have had a look at the church's programs, is to ask questions, the same questions, about the church's physical assets. So if you own your own building or you have a ministry campus, in that first column, you're going to be making a list of what those physical assets are. For example, perhaps your church has a fellowship hall. Perhaps your church has a chapel. Maybe your church has classrooms. Maybe you have a nursery that's part of your church building. Maybe you have some playing fields outside, or maybe a little playground. Maybe you have parking lots. You have office space. I don't know what all the physical assets of your church are, but you're going to make a long list of whatever those might be. Maybe you have a kitchen. And after you write down what some of those physical assets are, you're going to ask those same questions you did when we were looking at the programs. You're going to ask whether or not that particular physical asset is being used now for community benefit. And if so, what does that look like? Or if it's not currently being used in a way that benefits the community, Could it be used that way? And what might that look like? Now, some of you may be in churches that don't own your own building, and you rent the space where you are at. And in that instance, your own listing of the physical assets is likely to be different. Now, perhaps you're in a renting type situation where you're still the only user of that property, and there are a variety of physical assets on that site that you could, in fact, deploy in new ways. But even if you don't have that kind of rental space, maybe you're renting at a elementary school, for example, and so you really, other than that, on Sunday mornings or Saturday nights or whenever your worship service is, you don't really have access to that facility. Well, there may be other physical assets that you nevertheless have. For example, what about transportation vehicles? Do you have a church van? What about musical instruments? Are there, do you have a worship band and the church owns musical instruments? Maybe you have other audiovisual kinds of equipment. Again, you're going to just answer the question, what is in your hands? What has God placed in your hands? And make as comprehensive a listing of what those physical assets are. And then ask those questions. Are we using this particular physical asset only to benefit ourselves? Or are there ways we are using it to benefit the community? For example, maybe you allow Alcoholics Anonymous to come in on Tuesday afternoons and use the facility for their community meetings. Or maybe you have a commercial kitchen at the church, but really it's only used by church members and it's only used for church events. Well, the question becomes, could you imagine this commercial kitchen being used in a way that benefits community members? And if so, what might that look like? For example, it might look like inviting folks that have very, very small kind of micro catering companies where they're trying to use their own home kitchen to do catering, and you could really bless them by allowing them for free or for a very affordable fee the use of your commercial kitchen for their own food preparation. So again, I invite you to pause the video here and begin this process of inventorying the physical assets of the church. Again, bring on additional pieces of paper. Don't try to do the whole exercise right now, but at least take 5-10 minutes and write down a couple of different assets and begin this process of asking these questions and brainstorming how they might be used for community benefit. All right, the third one are the church's financial assets. And here what we're thinking about, of course, are the obvious things. The church has a budget, and then within that budget there may be particular funds that are used for external benefit. Maybe you have a benevolence fund. Maybe you have some kind of a local missions fund. Or maybe just in general, you have a missions budget. You may be lucky enough to have an endowment of one sort or another. Maybe you have other sort of specialized accounts where legacy gifts have been given by church members for different types of ministries. But among your financial assets are some other things as well, like your credit reputation, like your ability to access credit, like your relationship with financial institutions, places where you have checking accounts or savings accounts or money market accounts. So again, you're going to make a listing of the church's financial assets and then ask those same questions about how those are being used to benefit the community, or how could some of those things be used in new ways to potentially benefit the community. So again, I invite you to pause the video here and spend a little bit of time working on that part of the worksheet. All right, and then finally, you can ask some questions about the church's relational assets, the networks that it is part of. This is when you're beginning to think about the individual and the sort of corporate relationships that the congregation has. So individual relationships refer to the pastor and people on the church staff, church leaders. Where do you have good relationships with other pastors, with other congregations, with other faith-based ministries? Maybe you've had a long-standing partnership with a particular homeless shelter or some other kind of community serving ministry. Also put down on this part of the worksheet relationships that you might have with secular organizations. Maybe you have some ties to your local elementary school. Maybe you have somebody on staff at the church who has a personal friendship with a school official. Maybe you have some kind of relationship with a local agency in your community. Perhaps your church, for example, is involved in recruiting foster parents for children in the community. And so the church has a relationship with the city agency that is in charge of foster care. So you're going to make, again, a list in that first column of what some of those relationships or those networks that you're part of, what those are, and how those are currently being used to benefit the community. And then imagining a little bit how might they be further used for those for that community benefiting. So again, I invite you to pause and take a little time to think about those relationships and how those could be leveraged. The second part of the inventory is all about asking questions about your church's history and about your church's story. And for this, you also have a handout. It's a 4-page handout. So again, as we go through this, I would invite you to have that handout in front of you, because once again, I'm going to be inviting you to do a little bit of work on that worksheet as we go through this presentation. You'll want to stop the video at various points. But that 4-page handout basically has you thinking through as a group 4 main questions that you see on the screen here. You're going to be asking questions about what has the church been good at doing together? What are some of the church's strengths? The second one is similar. What do we have strong systems for? The third one is reflecting a little bit about the transitions that the church may have gone through at one time or another, that God has helped you to successfully weather. And the fourth thing is having you think a little bit about when you can remember times that God has provided for the congregation in particularly memorable or significant ways. In churchy language, number 4 is really about our Ebenezers, right? We sing that old hymn, "Here I raise my Ebenezer." Well, an Ebenezer is a monument to God's past faithfulness, marking a moment of particular provision. So why would I have you go through this kind of an exercise when this whole program is about how your church can be involved in the community? Well, the reason is that this exercise gets you thinking about some of the less tangible assets that the church possesses. That first exercise we looked at were things that felt very concrete, right? We could kind of get our hands around them. Do we have a kitchen? Or don't we have a kitchen? Do we have a church van, etc.? But there are other assets that your church has that are equally important. So with question number 1, what have we been good at doing? Well, the reason why that is really important is that that which you have been good at doing for one another may also be something that you would be good at doing for others. So here on your workshop, you are going to be making a listing of the church's strengths. So maybe one of the things that your church has been really good at doing is caring for people who are in crisis in the congregation. Maybe you have a Stevens ministry, for example, that comes alongside of those church members who are going through very difficult times, times of unemployment, or the loss of a parent or the loss of a child. Maybe one of the things your church has been really, really good at doing is supporting people in prayer. Maybe one of the things your church has been really good at doing is children's ministry. I don't know, but I'm sure that your church has some special strengths. And that which you have been good at doing for the health of your own flock may be a talent that can be leveraged, maybe something that you would be good at doing for people outside of the four walls of the church. Okay, so the second question is, what do we have strong systems for? So again, the systems that you have developed that facilitate healthy life in the body might again be assets that could be deployed for your ministry outside the four walls of the church. So for example, maybe your church has a really good system of communicating needs that people in the flock have and facilitating people who can get connected to meet those various needs. Maybe one of the strengths of your church is that you have really, really good systems for teaching people how to get closer to God. Maybe you have very strong discipleship programs that walk through people's sort of, 101, 201, 301. This is something that your church has put an enormous amount of time and energy into, and you have lots of talented teachers, and you have a whole structure, a whole system for that. Maybe one of the things that your church is great at and really has developed good systems for is putting on really effective events. Maybe you have been really great at church retreats, or maybe, as I mentioned earlier, maybe you put on a really wonderful VBS week during the summer, or you run some special family strengthening or marriage enrichment weekend conferences. So again, that which you have strong systems for that benefit folks that are inside the four walls of the church, those may be strengths and systems that can be utilized in an outreach ministry. The third part of our church's story exercise has to do with thinking about significant transitions that the church has gone through. Now, this may be more or less relevant to you depending on the age of your church. If you're an older congregation, chances are you have in fact gone through a number of transitions together. If you're a very, very young church, this may not be a particularly relevant piece of the exercise, and you can skip on ahead. But the point here is that when you think through transitions that God has brought you through, you will be able to first of all, just be encouraged, right? That God provided what the congregation needed to sort of pull together and do together to manage that transition. Maybe you had some terrible tragedy, like your church burned down. That would be a major transition, right? To work through that and acquiring a new facility or building a new facility. But as you reflect on that, you will remember, I think, strengths that emerged, or as you look back on that, lessons that you feel like God taught you during that time, muscles, so to speak, that God strengthened in you in going through that transition. Maybe it was a transition of planting a daughter church. Maybe it was a transition of moving from one facility to another facility. Maybe it was a transition of going from having one senior pastor to a new senior pastor. So take a little bit of time to think through whether there have been any significant transitions that the congregation, with the Lord's help, has successfully weathered. And make a notation about what some of those are, and just reflect a little bit as a group of what are some of the lessons maybe that you learned from those experiences, lessons that could be useful as you think about ministry outside the four walls of the church. Okay, and finally, the fourth question, our Ebenezer question, invites you to think through what some of the past times of God's provision have been. Where have there been those moments when God provided for the congregation in a really special way? Something that you look back on and you feel the well springs of gratitude kind of come back up in your hearts. Well, these Ebenezers are really important to remember, because as you go forward in any new kind of initiative, as you go into new territory, as you begin doing new things in your communities, you are likely to encounter some struggles, some difficult times, some challenges. And when you can have at your fingertips those anecdotes, those stories of God's past provision, that's going to be really, really helpful. Because as you face challenges and struggles in moving forward in outreach ministry, and some of your people begin to get discouraged or overwhelmed, being able to remind them that God has been with this church in the past. God has provided. He has been our Jehovah Jireh in the past. Look at what he has done before. He will again meet us in the midst of these particular challenges and needs that we are now seeing as we're trying to move into this new ministry territory, or launching new initiatives. So again, this is an opportunity for you to reflect on a kind of a different sort of asset that your church has, beyond the physical and the programmatic assets, to these important moments from your own story that need to be kind of remembered, capitalized, leveraged, the old stories told again, because all of that builds confidence. It builds a sense of encouragement in the congregation. It gives you sort of a shot in the arm to move forward in greater strength and greater confidence about what God can do through you as you move forward. So that's the second part of our three-part inventory. And the final part is the most important part, and that is our people assets. So we've looked at the church's institutional assets, we've looked at the church's story, and now we want to dig deeper into the people assets. What has God put in your hand? Well, the most precious thing he has put into your hand are all those people who are inhabiting your pews on any particular Sunday morning. And it's really important to know, well, who are these people? And what gifts and talents has God given to them? Because why? As I said at the beginning, we cannot steward well that which we do not recognize that we possess. So when you think about the people in your congregation, I wonder if you know the answer to these kinds of questions. do you know what the vocational expertise and experiences are that your congregants possess? Do you know who the lawyers are? Do you know who the carpenters are? Do you know who the counselors are? Do you know who has experience working with people who have experienced trauma? Do you know who the people are who have a teaching background? What do you know about the expertise, the gifts, the talents that the people in your pews have? Secondly, what do you know about the sectors of society in which they work? Do you know whether you have small business leaders or small business owners? Do you know those in your congregation who are working in the healthcare arena or who are working in the local government? Do you know who your artists are and who the people in your flock are who are involved in the realm of aesthetics and architecture and urban planning? Do you know what sectors your people work in? And then thirdly, what are the particular passions that your people have, the particular skills, their hobbies, etc., that your folks have that could contribute in many different ways to various kinds of community outreach? We cannot steward well that which we do not recognize we possess. And we cannot steward the gifts and talents and vocational power of our congregants well if we don't know the answer to these kinds of questions. So one of the really important things that I want to encourage your church to do is be involved in answering those questions. If you're a small church, 40 folks, 50 folks in your church, you can probably begin to find out those answers in a fairly organic process. Church leaders may already know a lot about the people that are in the flock because there's not very many sheep, and so you know them fairly well. And those that you don't know really well, you can take time to have a conversation with them. You can make phone calls, you can make coffee dates, you can learn and collate this information through conversations with folks in the congregation. But you want to be able to answer those three questions that we had on the previous slide. But if you're in a larger church, you've got more than 30 or 40 or 50 people, probably actually doing a survey is going to be the best route towards beginning to get you some answers of those three questions. Now, one of the ways that you can do that is to use an existing survey that is available to you through an organization called Made to Flourish. And in your handouts, you have the website of where you could go to download a very simple skill mapping survey that I put together for Made to Flourish. And this is a survey that you can use old-fashioned pen and paper if you have a relatively small congregation, or if you have a lot of older people in your congregation who are not super adept of going online, or if you have a congregation where you're not confident that people have relatively easy access to the internet, you'll want to just print out copies of this survey and have those available in the church. Put big collection baskets, with signage on them, so that after people fill out the survey, they know where to put it. And encourage people to take the paper survey. If you're in a congregation where folks are used to being online, maybe your own church has its own website, and you feel confident that most of the folks in the congregation have easy access to the internet, then you'll want to do this as an online survey. So the Made to Flourish skill mapping survey asks three basic questions. The first question is a question about what are the areas that people have particular skills or experience in. And so that data will just give you a long list of the number of people who possess the different types of skills that are asked about. The second question in the survey is an open-ended one, and it is there a particular demographic of people that you are passionate about? Some of your people might be really, really concerned and burdened by the needs of single moms in your community. Some of your folks might have a particular interest in reaching out to refugees and immigrants. Maybe some of your folks have a real heart for kids in the foster system, or maybe there are people in your congregation that say, I really have a passion for people coming out of prison and trying to, re-enter society. It's great for you to know what are the things that your people really, really care about. And the survey will be able to give you an idea of whether there's a particular people group that quite a number of folks in the congregation have a particular interest in serving or a particular passion for serving. And that's a really important piece of information for you as church leaders to know as you think about starting new community ministries. The third question on the survey provides a long list of occupational fields and invites the respondent to mark off their primary career field or their place of their daily place of work. If they're a student, basically the student thinks about what area of study they are in and then uses that to inform how they would, which box they would check. And there's also a place to check for folks who are retired or for folks who are currently unemployed. The survey also asks the respondent to provide their name, their gender, and their contact information. Once again, you can look in your packets, your handouts, to see the URL of where you would go on Made to Flourish's site to download that survey for free. You're also, of course, free to create your own survey. You might want to ask a few additional questions, but maybe the one that is available from Made to Flourish can serve as a bit of a starting template as you put together your own survey. Let me share a few tips with you with regard to implementing the survey. The first one is that, the purpose of the survey, it's a means to an end, right? You're not doing the survey just to do the survey. You're doing the survey in order to collect data. And that data then needs to be collated, needs to be analyzed, needs to be organized by a team of people. So that data becomes highly, highly usable for you. So even before you let folks know that you're going to be having them requesting that they fill out a short survey, you want to have in place that team of volunteers who have agreed to look at the survey responses and begin organizing the material from that. So that's the first tip. The second tip is that you want to talk up the survey in advance. So a couple of weeks before you plan to roll it out, begin mentioning it in announcements at church. If you have a church newsletter, let that announcement be in the newsletter. If you have a church bulletin, put a little box in the bulletin that mentions that the survey is coming, so that when you officially roll it out, people will be aware of it. They'll be expecting to see an email in their email box. They'll be expecting to receive a text or however it is that you're planning on doing the survey recruitment. But talk it up in advance. And the third thing, obviously, make sure people really know where to access the survey. So if it's a paper version, I would encourage you to copy it onto colored paper, preferably something really, bright and obnoxious, so you can hold it up and say, see this really bright lime green piece of paper? This is the survey this is where they'll be. They'll be right outside the church office, or they'll be, they'll be on a desk in the lobby of the church, or in the front foyer. Let people know where the survey is going to be. If it's an online survey, make sure that people know where to find that. Are they going to find that on a link on your website? Are they going to receive that in an email with a link to the survey or the URL to visit? Let them know where it's going to be. Make sure that the survey, if it's online, that it is formatted so that people can read it easily on a cell phone. If you download the MTF survey and then turn that into a SurveyMonkey or that kind of thing, a lot of those free survey creation softwares that are out there will allow you to format it in such a way that it's doable on a cell phone. And that may be an important feature for you, particularly if you have a congregation with a lot of 40 and unders that spend a great deal of time on their cell phones, and that might be the easiest place for them to take the survey. And then a final tip would be that if you do decide to create your own survey, try to resist the temptation to ask lots and lots of questions. Obviously, if the church is going to, if the leaders are going to go to the trouble of creating a survey and, trying to get folks to respond to a survey, there'll be a real temptation to ask lots and lots of questions because there's a lot that we want to know. But I would encourage you to keep it as short and simple as possible. You want to get a really, really high response rate, and the longer the survey is, the lower your survey response rate is likely to be. So again, with this survey, keep it short and sweet. All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground, but we began with the story about Moses and God asking him, what is in your hand? And I want to just leave you with the thought that your people are your most important asset. And it's really important for you to know more about your people, and particularly to know more about the work that your people do. Many of your congregants are really passionate about the jobs that they have. They love their jobs, they love their work, and they have a lot of skills, knowledge, and information and experience that can really be a powerful asset for your church going forward in terms of community ministry. I really want you to do all three parts of the 360-degree inventory, but if you only did one, I would really encourage you to begin by doing a simple survey of your congregation, particularly with the aim of trying to learn more about the gifts, talents, skills, occupations, sectors in which your folks work. They spend a lot of time at work. They have received training. They have acquired knowledge and expertise. And all of that is really, really crucial. And that asset needs to be stewarded well. And you can't steward well that which you do not recognize that you have. So do check out that free survey on Made to Flourish, and use it or use some modified version of it so that you will know as you are thinking about more robust engagement out in your community. So you will know what has the Lord put into your hands in terms of your people and their experiences and their particular knowledge, because you want to steward that well. Welcome back. I'm Amy Sherman, Senior Fellow at the Sagamore Institute, where I direct the Center on Faith and Communities. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate in Charity for Change, because I'm really passionate about seeing churches effectively and strategically deployed in their local communities as agents of flourishing. So in part one of this unit, we went through how you can take a 360-degree inventory of all that the Lord has placed in your hand, all the assets that he has placed in your hand that can be deployed in mission. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and review briefly with you that 360-degree inventory. And then we're going to continue our discussion about how to use and deploy that data. So what we said in part one is that we can undertake this fairly ambitious but really valuable process of completing a 360-degree inventory of the church's assets. And it had three parts that we walked through. The first involved inventorying the church's institutional assets. So taking a look at the programs of the church, the physical assets, the facilities of the church, considering the finances, the budget, the relationships that church leaders have with others in the community. Then we talked about the church's story, its history, remembering the ways that God in the past has been at work through your congregation, and remembering the ways in the past that God has brought you through difficult times, or remembering those Ebenezer moments when God has shown up and supplied. All of those things create faith, and they build confidence for the future and a willingness to take risks, realizing that the Lord will be faithful to us in the future just as he has in the past. Also, thinking about the congregation's story allowed us to kind of remind ourselves, what is it that the church has been really good at doing? And what sorts of systems does the church have in place for getting certain kinds of things done? Because those capacities, which may now be deployed for the benefit of congregants, are capacities that may be able to be deployed strategically in any kind of new community ministry. Then the third part of the 360-degree inventory involved taking a survey of the congregation to really learn about the human capital assets of the folks sitting in your pews, their work background, the occupation that they're in, the skills and talents and knowledge that they have, as well as asking them about their passions and concerns and interests. So now what we want to do in this unit, or in this section of the unit, this part of the unit, is to consider collating that data and then using it effectively. And there really isn't any, one right way after you have collected all this information. There's not any one, right way for collating it. I'm going to offer some suggestions. However you decide to do it, make sure that you take that raw data and you organize it into forms, some sort of forms, reports, documents, etc., that are easily usable, easily accessible, and ideally are sortable, because you're going to have, for example, when you do the survey of the congregation, you'll actually have people be providing their names and their phone numbers, their contact information. And so you'll be able to, organize that data by topic or by people, et cetera. So considering the survey, the skill mapping survey that we were talking about at the end of part one, I mentioned that Made to Flourish, this national organization of pastors, offers on its website this 3-question skill mapping survey that you can use in your congregation. And question 1 simply asks people in the congregation to check off a number of different skills that they possess, activities that maybe they've been involved in the past, particular talents and skills that they have. And really that raw data, I think the easiest way to have it be easily accessible, easy to use, and sortable is to just put that into a simple Excel worksheet. This is not difficult to do. It will be time consuming. It will be a little bit tedious. entering all that data in. But this will then give you a really robust tool by which, if you're thinking about, a new ministry to children, for example, and you have the question, I wonder who in our congregation has a background in being coaches or being involved in sports groups, you'd be able to go to that Excel worksheet and quickly identify people in the congregation that check that off as one of their previous experiences or skill sets. The second question in the skill mapping survey was an open-ended question that invited people to share with you whether there was a particular people group in your community that they were burdened for or had a passion around serving, or whether people wanted to indicate a particular issue or social concern that they had. So with open-ended responses, they're going to be kind of all over the map. Some people are going to say, oh, I'm worried about refugees in the community. And other people will say, I'm concerned about kids dropping out of school, or I'm concerned about broken families. You'll get many different responses, and the task there is really going to be a matter of looking at all those responses and basically grouping them into categories and as few categories as possible. So for example, you want to take similar responses and put them under some kind of umbrella topic. So let's say you have a few people that said, I'm worried about the schools, a few people who said they're really passionate around educational issues. You had a bunch of people who said their number one concern is around children. You had people who indicated that they're worried about school dropouts. You maybe had some people who said, I'm worried about kids that really ought to be able to read, but they're not reading. All of those things could be all lumped into one category called strengthen our schools, or an education category. So that's just a matter of doing that hard work of going through those things and then grouping those things into categories. You could put that in a Word document or an Excel document. Question 3 on that skill mapping survey allowed for your parishioners to indicate the field or the sector in which they are working, and it listed a whole bunch of different kinds of occupations. And there's, again, no right way to collate that particular data, but I would encourage you to think about organizing it using a paradigm from a group called the Thriving Cities Group. The Thriving Cities Group has come up with this idea that in order for any community to really flourish and be healthy, it needs to be robust and vibrant in 6 different arenas or 6 different realms of the society. And they call those 6 things the 6 community endowments. And on the screen here, you see a listing of those 6 categories: the good, the true, the beautiful, the just and well-ordered, the prosperous, and the sustainable. And I'm going to go through each of these realms or sectors or community endowments and give a quick sort of description about what's involved in that realm of society. And then some examples of the institutions, organizations, work sectors, careers that have to do with that particular community endowment. So the first one is the good, and this is the realm of social mores and ethics. This is basically the work in a society around moral formation and around practicing, strong social ethical values. So you'll see on the screen here that some of the different institutions and career fields, work that's relevant to this particular sector would be the work of stay-home parents who are raising children and certainly attending to their moral and character formation. Folks that are full-time in church ministry would fit this particular category. Certain social work jobs, people who work in the nonprofit sector in certain areas, those who are involved in philanthropic work. These are all people who would fit into this particular category called the good. The second realm is the realm of the true. This is the realm of human knowledge and learning. And of course, this is really, the part of the society that's concerned about education. So into this category, you would put all the people in your congregation who indicated that they work in libraries, in schools, in colleges and universities, people that work in the publishing industry, people who are involved in the production and the transfer of human knowledge and learning. The third group is the beautiful. This is the realm of design, creativity, and aesthetics. So into this category, you would put your architects, your artists, your people who are involved in all different kinds of cultural organizations, folks who work in galleries or museums, people that are musicians, folks that are involved in interior design, as well as folks who are involved in what we call the design of the built environment. People that are working for community planning boards, groups that are, sort of thinking about the public architecture of our streetscapes. So all of those sorts of folks in those occupations would fit into this second realm called the beautiful. Excuse me, the third realm is the beautiful. The fourth realm, the fourth community endowment, is called the just and well ordered. And this is the realm of political and civic life. And this is where you're going to put your police officers, folks involved in any aspect of the criminal justice system, lawyers, judges, as well as the people who are politicians, the people who are working for various nonprofit civic organizations, folks who are involved in zoning, city planning, people that are working for different kinds of local government organizations, public safety groups. All of the folks doing those sorts of jobs and that kind of work would fit into this particular community endowment. The fifth one is called the prosperous, and this is the broad realm of economic life. So these are all the people who are involved in the commercial activity of the community. So your real estate agents and your business owners, people who are involved in sales and marketing, folks who are involved in manufacturing and transportation, your bankers, your insurance people, all of those folks are involved in the economic realm, in the realm of the prosperous. And then finally, there's the realm of human and natural health, which Thriving Cities Group calls the sustainable. These are the folks who are in the healthcare professions. So all of your medical people who are attending to human health, doctors, nurses, people working in clinics, folks that work for research laboratories handling, blood, creating new medications, but also folks that are involved in the realm of the natural environment and promoting health in the natural environment. So folks who are involved in the energy and natural resource section, people whose job it is to be involved in the regulation that protects air quality and water quality, folks that are involved in various public, organizations around sanitation, the whole food industry and agriculture, and folks that are providing, hopefully, healthy food for us. All of those things, folks that are involved in creation care and gardening. These are people that you would put into the realm of the sustainable. So those are the 6 different categories or groups that you can take the occupational information from the survey and begin sort of sorting people into those 6 categories, if that's a way that you would want to organize that information. It's not the only way to organize it, but that is one that I would encourage you to consider. Then what you want to do is create some data dashboards. And at this point, let me say that all of this work that we're talking about, getting the survey out, going through an exercise like the Our Church's Story exercise, all of these things are working toward the end of creating this really valuable pile of data that then can be organized and used strategically by the congregation. But the process of getting to that valuable pile of data is also really, really important. And you want to go ahead and invite a number of folks in the congregation to participate in that process. This is not a task for you or your church staff to do by yourselves. Get together with longtime church members, folks that have been around in the church for many years, and ask them to help you go through the Our Church's Story exercise. When you're considering as a staff or as a group of church leaders, the inventory, going through the institutional assets, invite various congregants into that conversation. You want to have a lot of different people with a lot of different sets of eyes so that they're able to see what all the assets are. So don't think that you're doing all this work on your own. You're really going to be inviting a number of people into the process. And even in this work of data collation, go ahead and create a data team for that. Invite 2 or 3 people who are computer savvy, who are detail oriented, who are highly organized type folks, and get them involved in this data analysis and in this data collation, and get them thinking about the ways that they want to create some dashboards to take this big pile of data and kind of narrow it down into some key reports or visuals that can quickly present to the staff and the congregation the high-level findings from this exercise of the 360 inventory. And then those data dashboards can also be shared with your local ministry partners. So, for example, when you do the survey, and if you decide to then organize that raw data from the survey on question 3 about people's occupations and assign people to one of those 6 different community endowments, this will allow you to create a simple visual that you can share with the congregation that basically shows folks, you know, we're working in many different areas of our city, but here's where we're the most active. 26% of us are involved, for example, in the realm of the prosperous. Now, these are just numbers that I made up thinking about a hypothetical church of a couple hundred people. But you can figure out which are the endowments where the bulk of your people are involved. And I'll say something a little bit later about why that is important to know. Another sort of data dashboard will be to go through those open-ended questions and the categories that we talked about and really begin to identify what are the top concerns, the top passions that folks in the congregation have. And again, these are just hypothetical examples where maybe the top thing that was mentioned by folks were issues around children and education, but there are also concerns around immigrants or refugees and around low-income single moms. It's really important to know who are the people groups that your church is concerned about, what are the issues that folks in the pews are concerned about. You don't want to try to mobilize the church for being really, really involved in, you know, a healthcare initiative if what your folks are really passionate about is education, right? So you want to know what is really driving and motivating people, what they're really interested in and concerned about. Then also that congregational survey asks people to talk about their skills and their experiences, their giftedness and talents. And again, you want to be able to report back to the congregation maybe a list of the top 5 skills, or maybe a pie chart that indicates, how the skills are distributed. But getting a good idea of what is it that people in our congregation really know how to do. I was thinking about a particular congregation that I happen to know a little bit about, not my own congregation, and I was hypothesizing, what would their top 5 perhaps look like? And I came up with this list. In your church, it may look very different. If you've got a lot of blue collar people in your church, it might be that, number 1 are all those very practical trade skills, folks that are electricians and plumbers and carpenters and roofers and car mechanics. But organizing this information in a quick, easy visual way to give people kind of the high level results to help inform your work going forward. You also want to create some dashboards based out of the work that you've done, really inventorying the church's institutional assets. So again, in that process, you identified all of the different programs of the church, and you asked questions about who was this program serving and whether this program could possibly be tweaked in such a way to make it more externally focused. And so here on the screen, again, just as a hypothetical, I've listed some different programs that a church might have that they may have identified as something that could be utilized in some fresh ways as part of a new community outreach ministry. Same thing with the facilities. If your church has a campus, has a building, when you go through that inventory, you're wanting to look for those underutilized aspects of your facility. Where do things, stand unused on Monday through Saturday? Because it's that latent capacity, those untapped assets, that you want to activate and think creatively about how to deploy in potential new community ministries. So let's talk a little bit about about asset deployment. There are at least 4 reasons that I can think of for why a church that wants to, be involved in its local community to advance community good. 4 reasons why I would encourage you to do this admittedly hard work of completing this 360-degree inventory. And the first reason is that the inventory process can move your congregation into better stewardship of its facilities. We were just talking about that. Once you've identified those underutilized aspects of the church facilities, that is a great spur towards creative thinking about how to serve the community. For example, let's say you have an underutilized church kitchen. Well, you may be able to offer that to some local organization that is teaching culinary skills. Or maybe there is a caterer in the community who is looking for a low-cost, affordable place for her to put together, whatever it is, whatever food products she is serving. So you can identify what is not really being fully utilized and think creatively about how to engage in better stewardship. For example, there's so many people in our communities who lack access to affordable childcare. Well, what if you have some really great nursery space and some great, classrooms for little toddlers? It may be time for your church to consider starting a preschool. Or if you don't feel like you have the human or financial assets to do that, you might partner with some business people who say that they would like to start, or some nonprofit organizations that say we want to start a child care center, and you would be able to make your facilities available to them for reasonable cost. So that's the first reason why to do the hard work of a 360-degree inventory. A second reason is that this inventory can help you consider how to turn inwardly focused programs into ones with greater external focus. And that really can happen kind of in two kinds of ways. One I would call by invitation. So in other words, you think about programs that currently exist, that basically the participants in those programs are just people in your flock, and the beneficiaries of those programs are people in your flock. And the question is, how could this ministry invite others in? So let's say you have a summer vacation Bible school program that basically has been run in the past for the families that attend the church for the benefit of their children. Well, what about thinking through how to revise that VBS, expand it in ways that would allow you to invite people, families from the community and children, from the local neighborhood into that outreach. So that's one way is thinking about how can more people be invited into something that we do for ourselves so that it could benefit them as well. A second way to turn an inwardly focused program into one with a greater external focus is to ask whether there's a community serving element that could be added into the current program. So for example, let's say that the church has a strong men's ministry and men are gathering once a week for Bible study at the church. Maybe once a year, the men's ministry hosts an annual retreat. Well, what about the men's ministry thinking about how, as a men's ministry, as part of the rhythm of its own life, what if once a year it did a big service project for your local school? What if the leader of the men's ministry got in touch with your local principal, found out about some repairing or repainting projects that need to be done at the school to help clean up the school or make it more beautiful? Well, the men's ministry could provide a lot of sweat equity labor to get that work done. And now the men's ministry has not only that discipling focus of the Bible study and the fellowship component, but now also has this external focus, thinking about how the men can be mobilized to do service on behalf of the school. The third reason why I really want to encourage you to do this hard work of going through and completing a 360-degree inventory is because through that inventory, as church leaders, you're going to be able to strengthen your discipleship efforts because of the deeper insight that you're going to have into people's work. I'm hoping that everyone watching this video is committed to whole life discipleship, that you are teaching people in your flock that Christ is Lord of every arena of their lives, including their work life, and that their faith ought to be shaping their work as workers. Their faith ought to be shaping the way that they think about the sector of work that they are in. Well, you will be able to teach better on how to really integrate faith and work if you actually know more about where are your people working, what kind of work, what kinds of jobs are your people actually doing. And this will also afford you the opportunity to not only, have better illustrations in your preaching and teaching that draw upon, the work sectors that folks in your congregation are involved in, but it also provides opportunities for liturgies, for new ways of praying for people in the congregation, new affirmation and encouragement activities. Doing the inventory, for example, would end up giving you the opportunity to identify who are the business owners in your community, in your faith community. Wouldn't it be great if around Thanksgiving you had an annual, or around Labor Day, if you had some sort of annual acknowledgement where the business owners in your flock stand up and the church says thank you to them. Thank you for the jobs that they have created. Thank you for the goods and the services that they are providing to the community. That can really be a great affirmation for those folks in your communities, in your faith community, about the work that they're doing outside of the four walls of the church. Or think about graduation weekend. Maybe it's your practice to bring up the high school seniors on the Sunday morning of high school graduation week, and affirming them and acknowledging them and commissioning and blessing them for what lies ahead for them. Well, that's a great time to also affirm, pray for, lay hands on all the folks in the congregation who are working in the school system in one way or another. And you will know this if you have taken the time to do a congregational survey where you have invited people to tell you, I'm a teacher, I'm a school administrator, I'm the school janitor at such and such a middle school. You'll be able to know that you have a number of these people in your flock and know that this is a great time to acknowledge their work, to pray for their work. So you can really do a much better job in your discipleship, and particularly discipling people as they think about how their work should shape them, how their faith should shape them as they think about the career field that they are in, as they think about the workplaces that they inhabit. The more you know about where your people are working, the better able you will be able to do that kind of discipleship. And then finally, this process of doing a 360-degree inventory of the church's assets, that can help you as church leaders to begin to identify the particular types of community investments and initiatives that your church might be best suited to take on. Again, why get really excited about doing something in healthcare if few people in your congregation have a passion around that, and if few of your people are actually working in that sector? If you know what people's skills, interests, gifts are, if you know where the preponderance of folks in your flock, which realms they're working in, these can be clues from God as to the best ways for you to lead your flock into community engagement. There is no shortage of problems in any particular community. We have foster kids that need help. We have schools that need help. We have people who are unemployed or underemployed. We need economic development. Communities struggle with homelessness, with broken families. The list just goes on and on and on and on. And so to think about how to be strategically engaged in your community, one of the things you need to have in your mind is, well, who is this group of people that I'm shepherding? Where do they work? What are their passions? What are their gifts and skills? And what do those things tell me about the particular kinds of problems in the community that we might best direct our efforts to? If you've got a lot of people in the education sector, it may make a whole lot of sense for your church to be involved in some kind of educational ministry. So doing this community inventory, this church inventory, this 360-degree inventory, so you really have a good sense of the assets that you have to deploy. is a really, really important and foundational part of effectively mobilizing your people for community ministry. And we're going to get more into that in part 3. Well, welcome back to Unit 7 of Charity to Change. I'm Amy Sherman. And you may remember that at the beginning of our first session, I mentioned that for a number of years, I had the privilege of running a church-based urban ministry called Charlottesville Abundant Life Ministries. Well, I made a lot of mistakes as a ministry leader. This video would be way too long if I went through all of my different mistakes. But I want to tell you about one mistake in particular that I really want you to avoid as you think about your own church-based ministries serving the community going forward. The mistake that I made had to do with how I thought about volunteer mobilization and volunteer recruitment. Our ministry had a tutoring program, had a basketball team, had a job and life skills program for adults, had a women's prayer ministry. We were involved in a variety of initiatives. And each fall, at the beginning of the fall, I had the opportunity at my pretty large church, about 1,100 members at that time. I had the opportunity to stand up in front of the church and make sort of my annual pitch, to solicit volunteers to come and be part of what we were doing at Abundant Life Ministries. And the mistake that I used to make in the first couple of years of the ministry was I would look out at the folks in the congregation and I would just sort of see them as generic bodies sitting in those seats. And in my mind, I was thinking about the lists that were written up on the back of the church at a sign-up table. And the lists, kind of had all of these blank slots. I needed a certain number of tutors for the after-school program. I needed a certain number of teachers in the job training program, and I needed people who would be willing to be part of what we called friendship circles that were coming alongside of adults in the program and just cheerleading them. I needed, folks that were going to help out in running the women's prayer group and these various programs. And so I would sit there, or stand up actually, and look out at the congregation. And I was just seeing all these bodies that could potentially fill all of those slots. I was not looking out at the congregation and thinking to myself, oh, he's an auto mechanic. She's a teacher. I was not thinking he owns a business, or he's a banker, or she's an accountant. I wasn't thinking about them in terms of the particularities of their gifts and talents, and particularly the particularities of their work and their vocational power. Now, why was that a mistake? Well, that was a mistake because by failing to really see who these people were in the fullness of their particular talents, was not necessarily inviting them into service roles that most strategically leveraged what it was that they had to offer. The way I like to think about it was that sometimes I was asking a banker to come down and be a basketball coach instead of talking with that banker about what he and other colleagues in the banking industry could do to address the payday lending that was going on, that was really affecting families who were part of the ministry, trapping them into various forms of debt. So we When you're thinking about volunteer recruitment and volunteer mobilization, think about the particularities of the folks in your congregation. We need to see them as individuals who have unique talents, skills, networks, life experiences, hobbies, all these things that could be strategically leveraged. And I have found that usually when you invite people to serve in a ministry in a particular role or capacity that draws upon their vocational background, they're often a lot more likely to say yes, and they're a lot more likely to be excited about that service. Now, it's not always that way. I had school teachers, for example, who the last thing they wanted to do was be a teacher in our summer camp program. You know, they loved teaching, but they were done by the summer. And then there's just some people who really hate their jobs, right? And so they don't necessarily, if they hate being an accountant, they're not really going to be that excited about working with you in your ministry to, do accounting type tasks. But as a general rule, I have found that a lot of people do like what they do, and they can really feel like they have a lot to contribute or offer if you present to them roles that draw upon their skills and their passions. So this is why doing the hard work of mapping your church's assets, as we talked about in the past two sessions, and gaining that information about your congregate's vocational experience and skills, this is just going to give you a lot clearer picture of who it is that's out there and what it is that God has placed into your hands. And in this final session, we're going to be thinking about how to strategically deploy the people in the flock. And we're going to talk about two basic things, two tasks that church leaders need to do if they are going to be effective in strategically deploying their people. And we're going to spend a relatively short amount of time talking about the first task and a longer amount of time talking about the second task. So let's dig into the first task. And I call it moving to a cause mindset. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm contrasting a cause mindset with an organizational or a program mindset. What I mean is that whatever particular community ministry the church is involved in doing, it's connected or aligned with a larger cause. So, for example, let's say that you've done some analysis of your congregation and you've discovered that you've got quite a few people who really care about kids, they care about schools and education, and it just so happens that you have a number of folks in the congregation who are working in that community endowment or that realm of the true, the realm that attends to education. And so that's gotten you started thinking about, well, maybe what we ought to be doing in our community is something about kids in schools. And so you've thought about partnering with the local elementary school that's nearby and starting an after-school program. So your church is the organization and it's running a program, but that program is part of a larger cause. It's part of something bigger than just the individual program that you're running. So, for example, the cause might be school success for at-risk kids, or maybe the cause is strengthening our local schools. Depending on the particularities of the program that the church might be envisioning on running, whether it focuses on younger kids or older kids, maybe the cause is every kid reading by the 4th grade, or combating and decreasing the high school dropout rate in our city. See, the cause is something bigger than what your particular program is doing. When you adopt a cause mindset, you're basically keeping three things in mind. The first is the fact that your organization and your program are just one player in this cause. There are other people doing things, other programs, other organizations, and they're taking on other pieces of the cause. You've got your slice and they've got a number of other slices. And that there are a variety of institutions and actors in your community whose activities and performance bear on the cause and on the prospects for the success of the cause. When you have this cause mindset, you're operating in such a way that you're saying the cause is the really important thing. Our organization, our program, that's important. We're passionate about it. We're excited about it. But it's not the main thing. The most important thing is the larger cause. And when you have that kind of mentality, frankly, I think it really honors God, because it means that you can celebrate when God raises up people or other organizations or other churches who do various things that help to advance that cause, even if whatever it is that they are doing doesn't specifically help your organization or serve your particular program. And this cause mentality also means that you're turning away from turfism, from pride, from having a competitive spirit. You're saying, hey, I know we're just one piece of this larger whole, and you're actually glad for the other players who are also trying to advance the same cause, because you're passionate about what that cause is, and you want that cause to be successful in your community. Last thing I'll say about the cause is that it's been my experience that most of the time, most people are more motivated to get involved based on a cause than they are motivated by a particular organization or passion. The cause is bigger. That the cause might be something that they really feel jazzed about. And to the extent that you can show that volunteering within your ministry is part of advancing that larger cause, they're more likely to be excited. You have a variety of worksheets for this particular session. And at this point, I'd love to have you pull out the handout that's called Identifying Your Cause. On the screen, what you see is the phrase strengthening the school community. I mentioned earlier that there's this hypothetical church, and it's decided that it wants to get involved in running an after-school program. But as it thought about the activities that it will be doing, it wanted to identify this larger cause that it's part of. And they've decided to word or articulate their cause as strengthening the school community. So on your worksheet, you will find a number of examples of different church and nonprofit organizations. And on the left-hand column, it just talks about the types of things that they do, the activities that they are involved with. And then on the right-hand column, what I've tried to do is suggest one way of articulating that larger cause that those organizations are involved in. And then you'll see that there's some blank rows there on that particular worksheet. And I would encourage you to go ahead and pause this video and work on your own, or maybe with your team if you're watching this training video together, and brainstorm a little bit. Maybe you could think about a current outreach ministry that the church runs, describe it a little bit on the left-hand column, and then brainstorm what is the larger cause that ministry is really aligned with or is a participant in. Or you might be already thinking at this point in the Charity to Change process, Maybe you're beginning to make plans about a new community ministry that you're thinking about. Well, go ahead and start writing down what you think some of the activities of that new ministry might be. And then again, start thinking about how would you articulate very succinctly the larger cause that that particular program is part of. So that's the first task in strategically deploying your people, identifying the larger cause that your organization or program is part of. The second task has to do with beginning to think through how to create on-ramps or various ways that volunteers can get involved in the ministry and in that larger cause. And I have found in working with churches and nonprofits over the past few decades that oftentimes we have a limited kind of conception or imagination about the ways that people might get involved. And we usually think about two on-ramps in particular. The first one and most common one is what I call direct service or frontline service. We're going to look at that in just a minute. This is kind of the bread and butter, right, of most nonprofits and church ministries. These are the volunteers that are there to be hands-on with the folks that are participating in that program, whether those are children or adults or teenagers. They're the ones that are doing the work of the ministry in a very direct way. So if it's a basketball program, they're the coaches. If it's a tutoring program, they're the tutors. They're hands-on. They're serving right on the front lines. They are staffing, quote unquote, the various ministry programs. And that is the volunteer on-ramp for which most ministries need the most people. And therefore, it's not surprising that that's the on-ramp that most ministry leaders, think about, and certainly the one that they probably spend the most time attempting to recruit people into. So that direct hands-on service. The second on-ramp that I find that some ministries also, begin to conceive of is what I call organizational capacity building. And this is basically the sort of behind-the-scenes administrative type work that's needed for the organization or for the program. So, these are the people who maybe come alongside a program director and help him or her out with various administrative tasks or filing, or maybe this is the group of volunteers who comes in and gets your ministry's newsletter out and in the mail. But they're those behind the scenes kinds of roles. Those are the two on-ramps that ministry leaders tend to think about. But what I want to suggest is that there's actually 7 of these on-ramps that are worth really thinking about. And what we're going to do now is kind of go through them and describe them and look at some examples. And at this point, I would invite you to get out 2 more of the worksheets. These ones are titled 7 on-ramps, handout number 1 and handout number 2. All right, so for the purpose of this exercise that we're going to go through, I'm pretending that I'm a ministry leader at a hypothetical church called Christ Community Church. And Christ Community has done the work of mapping the assets that it has, and it has done the skill mapping survey, and it's begun to look at that data and identify what the passions and interests of the congregants are, as well as sort of who's deployed where in terms of those 7 different realms. And they have discovered that they have people in the church that really care about kids and education. And they've discovered that they have quite a few people in the church whose professions have them working in the realm of the true, in terms of those 6 community endowments that we looked at in an earlier session. So Christ Community Church has decided to launch a new community serving program called Kid Zone. And Kid Zone is going to be a partnership with a local Title I elementary school that's located just a few blocks away from the church. A Title I school is a school that has a very high percentage of children in poverty. And we have begun building a bit of a relationship with the principal at the school. It's called Johnson Elementary School. We've begun to get to know the school social worker there at Johnson Elementary. And we've said, we want to run this after-school tutoring program over at our church. We hope that some kids from Johnson Elementary who live in the community would be interested in participating in that. And that we just really want to come alongside and be a good partner with the school. So now as a church leader, I'm thinking about how to mobilize and deploy the folks in the flock to be volunteers in the Kid Zone ministry, but also to be, participating in this larger cause that we've identified that we've called strengthen our local school. So again, that first on-ramp is that frontline volunteer, that hands-on service supporting the actual participants in the program. And I've given you some examples here. So if you look at the left-hand column there, these are the individuals from the church who say, they raise their hand and say, I want to be part of Kid Zone. So they're the ones that are going to come and volunteer to tutor the kids and work on their homework with them. And a young married couple, raises their hand and they say, we'll be the game supervisors because you're going to start off Kid Zone with getting the kids there. And the first thing they're going to do is spend about 20 minutes running around the gym that your church has, playing some games to kind of get their energy out a little bit before they sit down to do their homework. So all the folks that are involved in those hands-on activities are basically coming into the ministry on this first on-ramp. But take a look at that third example I've got listed there in that left-hand column. An individual from the church volunteers to serve as a reading buddy over at Johnson Elementary School. Well, you might sort of be wondering, well, what's that? What's the reading buddy program? Well, here the idea is that Johnson Elementary School has its own program called Reading Buddies, and it happens in the mornings, and it provides community volunteers who come in and work one-on-one with kids who are really struggling with their reading. Now, if you have a cause mindset, you might be recruiting volunteers there at Christ Community Church, and a woman comes up and says, I'd be really interested in being a tutor, but Kid Zone happens in the afternoon, and I have a part-time job, and I work every afternoon. I'm available in the mornings, but I'm not available in the afternoons. Well, when you have that cause mindset, you can genuinely say to that woman, we would love to have you involved in the ministry. Remember that we are part of this larger cause called strengthening our local school. Let me tell you about the fact that Johnson Elementary, the school that we're partnering with for the Kid Zone program, they have a program that's in the morning. And you could serve and volunteer as a reading buddy over at the school one morning a week and work one-on-one with a kid who really needs help with her reading. So that's what a cause mindset helps you to do. Think not only about the ways that people can plug into the particular activities that you are doing, but also think about ways that maybe they would be a better fit volunteering in another organization, but in ways that advance the cause. All right, on-ramp number 2, organizational capacity building. Again, we've already talked about this a little bit, but here you see some examples. So we've got the individual who volunteers to create and maintain an Excel database directory with all the information on the participating kids and volunteers in the Kid Zone program. Organizational capacity building is basically a form of volunteering that involves people using their different skills in these sort of behind the scenes roles to strengthen the organization. They're not necessarily those direct hands-on roles with the people in the ministry. So a second example I've listed there is a graphic designer from the church who says, I want to be involved. I can't volunteer at Kids Zone because I'm working in the afternoon. But I'd be glad to use my skills as a graphic designer to help you come up with an informational brochure about the Kids Zone program. So that would be another example of an organizational capacity builder. And then the third example I've listed there again comes from having a cause mentality. So there's a professional grant writer in the church. And, here at the very beginning of Kids Zone, you're just funding it with church money, and you're not planning on going after any grant funding until the program's, developed a bit of a track record. But this professional grant writer is willing to help out. Well, what about connecting that person with the principal over at Johnson Elementary? Because the principal might be able to really use someone like that. So in my hypothetical scenario here, the principal at Johnson Elementary School actually does need some help writing a proposal to a foundation to get some new playground equipment. So that's a way that that professional grant writer could be involved. Now, the third on-ramp I call ministry staff support. This is basically a way of thinking about how to strengthen the program and contribute to the program by coming alongside and encouraging and supporting and praying for the leaders in that particular ministry. Frontline ministry leaders work very hard. They get tired. They deal with lots of difficult circumstances. They're up close and personal with the problems that the folks that they are serving are dealing with. And all of that can be very heavy and very stressful. It's emotionally difficult work. So another way that volunteers can be involved in ministry is not as people who come and serve the program beneficiaries, but people who actually come and serve the staff running the programs or the leaders overseeing the programs. So the example I've given you here is that there's a retired gentleman in the congregation, and he says, I'm not really all that great with kids, but I really like our church's outreach pastor, who hypothetically is this young man who's been, hired recently to be the church's outreach pastor, and he's now overseeing the Kids Zone program and the whole Strengthen Our School initiative. And this retired gentleman says, I would like to pray regularly for the outreach pastor and come alongside him a couple of times a semester or a year and take him out for lunch and encourage him and pray for him. That would be a great way for somebody to be involved. And if they haven't thought of it, you can suggest that kind of way of serving. You will find that you have, extroverted type people who really want to be, hands-on with the kids in the ministry. You'll have some introverted people who the attraction is serving kind of in those behind-the-scenes roles. And then you have these other folks who say, I really do want to be involved in the ministry, but kind of the programs that you're running and the volunteer jobs that are involved with those, none of those really fit, who I am or what my schedule is. But these might be people that would be great for the role of providing that prayer and encouragement to ministry leaders. Well, before I send you off to pause the video and think a little bit about these first three on-ramps and your own brainstorming, let me mention why I have a second column there called group level responses. Everything we've been talking about so far are examples of ways that individual parishioners could on-ramp into the Kids Zone ministry and the Strengthen Our Schools cause at that individual level. But in any church, there are also groups and subgroups. So a lot of churches will have things like men's ministries or women's ministries or children's ministries or a church youth group. Or a church might have a choir. A church might be organized into small groups that meet regularly for fellowship and discipleship. So churches are composed both of individuals and they're composed of these groups. And you want to be thinking as you do volunteer recruitment, not just about soliciting the involvement of individuals, but you also want to be thinking strategically about how the different groups in the congregation might be involved in serving in the ministry as groups. And what's great about that is that approach then begins to really sort of create a greater sense of buy-in towards the outreach ministry because it's embedding it into those different groups. So for example, look at on-ramp number 1 there, direct service. What if the church youth group says, well, we want to be involved in this new Kids Zone initiative. And so the way that they're going to do that is on the very first day when Kids Zone happens, the youth group is going to make some extra special snacks for the kids and the volunteers. And they're going to show up on that very first day. And they're going to help out the young couple that's serving as the game supervisors. And they're going to be there in the gym to play some of these games with the kids. Well, what if that goes really well and the kids in the youth group really enjoy that? Well, that could become a regular part of what it means to be involved in the youth ministry. This could be an annual thing or each semester. This could be something that the church youth group does as a youth group, or maybe even something more often than that. So that part of what it means to be part of the youth group is that the youth group is part of the Kids Zone ministry. And so in that way, you've embedded Kids Zone into the church's youth group. And that's really good for the long-term sustainability of the Kids Zone ministry, right? Because it's embedded. Same thing if the choir gets embedded, if the choir gets involved as a group in some way in the ministry, then it embeds that and it gets more people connected to that ministry, more people caring about that ministry, more people feeling as though they are part of that ministry. And all of that leads to sustainability and longevity for your outreach ministries. So let's take a quick look at some of the other group level responses on the other on-ramps. So you'll see there the men's ministry hosts a summer Saturday work day at the school, painting and repairing things according to the directions of the principal. That's a group level response, and it's really, again, coming out of that cause mentality. So this is not a group of men coming and serving at Kids Zone, although the men's group could be encouraged to do that as well. But this particular example is the men's ministry coming alongside and doing a work day over at Johnson Elementary School. So they're participating in the larger cause. Or on the third row there, ministry staff support, maybe a couple of small groups at the church would say, we really want to be involved in this. And the way that you could encourage them as a small group to be involved is to say, well, in our partnership at Johnson Elementary, we're working really closely with this young woman who's the school social worker. And she's really involved in helping us identify potential kids that could benefit from Kid Zone and helping us get connected with their families. And we know that her job is really, really hard. She's got, all these kids at the school, and the families they come from have a lot of different needs, and she's, really a hard worker. We would love for your small group to be involved in really supporting her in some neat ways. And so you see some description there on the screen about small groups saying, yeah, well, maybe once a semester we could babysit that woman's children and send her out to a restaurant with her husband, just as a way of saying thank you for this important work you're doing at the school. So you have individual level responses and group level responses in these various on-ramps. So I invite you now to pause the video and begin filling in those blank cells in the worksheet with some examples of how folks could be involved at these different levels and these different on-ramps. And you can do that for a current ministry program that the church has, or you can do that as you hypothesize about this future new ministry that perhaps you will be starting as a result of Charity to Change. I want to invite you now to take the second handout that will list out on-ramps 4 through 7. And I'm going to again go through, we're pretending that we're Christ Community Church and that we're starting this Kid Zone program, doing that in collaboration with our local elementary school a few blocks away called Johnson Elementary School. And let's take a look here at the 4th and 5th on-ramps. The 4th on-ramp I call institutional investment. And this on-ramp definitely requires you to be operating from a cause sort of mindset. So what do I mean by institutional investment? Well, it's highly likely that the quality of life experienced by the participants that you are trying to serve in your ministry, that the quality of their life is affected by a variety of organizations and institutions in your community. So in our hypothetical Kid Zone program, we're thinking about the kids, and we're thinking about their families. Well, it's certainly the case that those families, the quality of what's happening in the lives of those kids and those families, that is affected by the strength and the performance of Johnson Elementary School. It's also influenced by other neighborhood organizations like the local library or businesses in the community that either are or are not providing jobs and relevant services to the parents of the kids that you're working in. These families' lives are influenced and shaped by government agencies that are involved in their lives, by the local police force, by the neighborhood association that's active in the housing development where they are living. So there's a variety of institutions and organizations whose activities and performance bear on the quality of life of the people that you care about, the people that you're trying to serve in your ministry. And sometimes one of the most strategic ways that you can leverage the talents of folks in your congregations is by basically encouraging them to share those gifts and talents in some of those other institutions. So let's look at a couple examples. So let's say there's a dentist at the church. Well, in your community asset mapping, which was a topic I know you did in Charity to Change earlier, perhaps you identified a local nonprofit that provides low cost or free dental services. I'm going to pretend that that was the case at Christ Community Church. When we went through Charity to Change and we did our community asset mapping, we identified the Healthy Smiles local nonprofit. And we know that that organization provides discounted dental services to low-income kids who are at Johnson Elementary School. So a great way for a dentist from the church to volunteer in the ministry is not necessarily by coming down and being a tutor in Kids Zone. They may do that, and if they want to do that, that's great. But it may be more strategic for that dentist to be encouraged to go volunteer at Healthy Smiles. And in that way, to be deploying their vocational power in alignment with your larger cause, which is to, strengthen the school and strengthen the kids in the school and meet the various needs of those children. A second individual level response for this idea of institutional investment might be that a congregant whose own kids go to Johnson Elementary decides that they're going to join the Johnson School PTA. Congregants are busy. They can't volunteer in everything. They have to pick and choose. Maybe one or two things that they've got the freedom of time to be able to be involved in. But if you have a cause mentality, you could get really excited about the fact that there's a man or a woman in your church who wants to go and serve on the Parent-Teacher Association at the school and celebrate that as a win for the cause. Again, even though that individual is not specifically coming down and helping out at Kids Zone. And for this on-ramp, as for all of them, you can also be brainstorming group level responses. Earlier, we talked about the church youth group potentially showing up on the first day of Kids Zone with special snacks and helping out for the recreational time in the gym. Well, maybe another way that the church youth group could be involved in the cause as an investor in an institution would be to come alongside the neighborhood association at the local housing development down the street where many of the Kids Zone families live. Let's say that neighborhood association is planning a back to school bash on the Saturday before school starts. And they have a barbecue and they just hand out school supplies and they encourage the kids about learning and being excited about being back in school. Well, what a great way to have the church youth group embrace this larger cause by helping that neighborhood association pull off that back to school event. So that's institutional investment. On-ramp number 5, I call strategic intrapreneurs to distinguish them from the next on-ramp, which is about entrepreneurs. So what is this on-ramp about? Well, we want to be engaging in conversations with folks at the church in ways that help them imagine themselves as advocates or champions of this outreach ministry. So as the outreach pastor at Christ Community Church, I'm having conversations with folks in the church, letting them know what's going on at Kids Zone and what we're doing, letting them know about the various ways that we're partnering with the school. And I'm encouraging them to think about their workplaces. I'm encouraging them to think about what goods and services are produced by their workplace, and what might be some ways that the companies or organizations that they work for might come alongside and support either Johnson Elementary or specifically the church's Kids Zone program. So let me give you some examples of that. We got an arts-oriented gal at the church, And she works for a local nonprofit that is all about the arts. Or I guess it's a male volunteer in this example. So he works for this arts-oriented nonprofit. And you've sort of cultivated a vision in this young man, and you've given him some knowledge about Johnson Elementary School and about the kids that are involved in Kids Zone. And you've gotten him excited about thinking about how he might be an advocate in his workplace to do something that benefits the school or the kids. And so in this instance, this guy goes back and talks to his nonprofit organization about what if we were to do a special, one-day session or half-day session on a Saturday, where we come down to the church and we set up in the gym, and the Kids Zone kids come on a Saturday morning, and it's a special arts and crafts workshop. Maybe we invite some of the parents to come along as well. So that congregant has gone back into their organization and created an innovation, brought a new idea. That's why they are an intrapreneur. They're inside the organization and they're innovating something new. And the something new that they're innovating is benefiting Kids Zone or benefiting the larger cause. Another example of this would be a congregant is working at a real big company in the town, and she finds out that the company is about to get rid of a bunch of its computers and replace them with newer ones. Well, maybe these older computers are only a couple of years old, and they're still actually really in pretty good shape. So she uses her influence and is an advocate at her organization to talk to some of the higher ups in the company to say, hey, my church is involved in doing this thing with low-income kids. We have this program called Kids Zone. It's this after-school thing, and part of it involves we want to set up this computer lab so that the kids can, play computer games that teach them different kinds of math skills. And we're looking for 6 donated computers that are in, good shape. So again, this woman is using her influence within the workplace to be an advocate for that company to do something new that benefits the cause or benefits the particular ministry program. So those are on-ramps 4 and 5. Let's move on to 6 and 7. So on-ramp number 6, I call strategic social entrepreneurs. So we just talked about the entrepreneurs who go and think about within the company or the organization that they work for, how can they be an advocate or a champion to maybe create a new way of doing something that benefits the cause or the ministry. A strategic entrepreneur is that person who says, wow, I love this whole Kids Zone thing that you're talking about. And I've got some ideas myself about some additional things that maybe we could do, and I'm willing to lead them. So as you talk about Kids Zone, there could very well be someone sitting in the congregation who, either because of different types of passions or their work schedule, actually volunteering in on-ramp number 1 or the strategic, the hands-on service, or on-ramp number 2, the kind of behind the scenes. Neither one of those, suits them or fits them. But as this example on the screen lists, you have this photographer in the congregation, and he or she comes up with this idea of, well, I'd love to teach these kids in Kids Zone a little something about photography, and I'd love to see them, get out there and begin to take photos and have the joy of developing an eye to, kind of see the world around them, and particularly to spot the unique things or the beautiful things or the quirky things, in their community. And so this individual says, I'm not available to come down and be a tutor for Kids Zone, but I'm a photographer, and I'd be glad to get my hands on some disposable cameras and do a special event with your kids, one weekend or whatever. Maybe it's a 4-week program. I don't know what it would be, but the idea is that this individual steps up to the plate and says, I want to create something that enhances what the ministry is already doing. A second example of this at the individual level is a little bit, again, on the cause mentality. Here we have a congregant who is a librarian at the local public library. And as the outreach pastor, I have had conversations with this particular woman. Her name is Doris, and she's the librarian at the local library. And I've sort of shared with her and lamented with her that a number of the kids in Kids Zone are really struggling to read well. And when I've asked the kids about reading at home or whether they like to be read aloud to, most of them say that their mom or dad isn't involved in reading to them. Well, maybe Doris also, that kind of pushes at her heart too. And so she decides, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to come up with a new little pilot program here at the public library. And I'm going to start a Mother Read workshop. And I'm going to offer that workshop for any, moms in the community, but I'm going to really, try to work with the church and get the word out to the moms of the Kids Zone kids. And this is I'm going to sort of show them the benefits of reading aloud to your kid and some strategies for how to do that effectively. And I'm going to work to see if I can't get some donated books so we can, give away some books to the moms and the kids that show up. So those are some examples of this idea of strategic social entrepreneurs. At the group level, I've given you an example there. So the church has a women's ministry. And again, as the outreach pastor, I have shared with the leader of the women's ministry at the church a little bit about the kids that are in Kids Zone. I've talked to them about how the parents sometimes are really struggling financially, and they might have to make a choice between, rent and medical care and food and clothes, and budgets are just really, 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 really tight. And some of the kids come to Kids Zone, and we realize that they don't have the best clothing, or they maybe don't have, appropriately heavy coats for wintertime or the like. And so the women's ministry decides, well, we want to do something special for that. We want to create our own little initiative. And so they organize a clothing drive, and they collect a bunch of really good condition children's clothing, and they organize a special one-day pop-up thrift shop in the gym at the church, and we invite the parents of the Kids Zone kids to come down to the church on a Saturday, and to shop in this pop-up thrift store where we're going to have all these really nice children's clothes and boots and mittens and scarves and all that winter stuff that they can purchase at greatly discounted prices. So that's the sixth on-ramp. And finally, number 7, upstream change makers. What do I mean by that one? Well, a lot of times in our various ministry programs, we're sort of acting at what I would call a downstream level. Sort of imagine this metaphorical river, and there are people who are in the river and they're drowning because they maybe don't know how to swim, or maybe they're disabled, and so it's very difficult for them to swim. but anyway, what we're doing is we're downstream. They're in the water. They're all wet and bedraggled or whatever. And our ministry is involved in trying to, help them get out of the stream, help them get cleaned up, help them, get into dry clothing, maybe respond to their desire to learn how to swim. But we're operating at that sort of downstream level, that we're addressing the symptoms of people's various problems and trying to alleviate some of those symptoms. But it's really important, if the cause is going to be advanced, that we sort of look upstream and begin to ask questions about, well, why are there so many people in the river in the first place? What's happening upstream? Are people falling into the river? Are people getting pushed into the river? Are there no guardrails on the walkway along the river, and so people accidentally fall in? What are the policies that are happening? What are the programs? What are the decisions that are getting made? What are the systems that are influencing this? And where are the broken parts of those policies and those programs and those rules and regulations that are contributing to having lots of people end up in the river? At the upstream level, you're trying to address some of those causes, some of those root causes of why folks are ending up in the river. And there may be individuals in your congregation who have access to decision-making tables in your community, or who have the particular kinds of skills to be good advocates or lobbyists at those decision-making tables. Or you may have people that have particular professional skills and expertise and knowledge that relates to some of those upstream issues and causes. And it may be that the most strategic way for them to be involved in this new Kids Zone ministry is not to come down on Tuesday afternoon and help a kid with homework, but to use and leverage their power, their knowledge, their skills, their access, their relationships, their networks, to influence those upstream issues. So I've given you a couple examples here. Let's say that there's a retired school principal in the congregation. Well, again, you might be really tempted to encourage that woman to come down on Tuesday afternoon and be a homework helper. And that's not a bad thing to do. And that may be exactly the way that individual would love to support the Kids Zone ministry. But you at least should have a conversation with that individual about whether there might be some more strategic ways for that individual who has some unique experience, right? Not everybody in the church is a retired school principal, but this woman is. So how are you going to leverage and deploy that very unique asset? Well, it might be that you've found about a task force that's happening, either in the school district at large. And it's a task force that's really trying to focus on this topic of how are we going to improve reading skills among the kids in our Title I elementary schools, which include Johnson Elementary. And encouraging this retired school principal to consider volunteering on that task force. That may be the most strategic way to utilize that individual, rather than as I say, having her enter the ministry in volunteer on-ramp number 1. Number 7 would be a more strategic use of her gifts. Similarly, maybe there's another congregant with a long history of just being involved at Johnson. Maybe all of his kids went to Johnson, and he had 4 kids in the family, and now they've all gone through Johnson, and they're onto other schools. Well, that individual, you might be talking to him And you might find out that, he's really passionate about the schools, and he's actually considering a run for the school board. Well, great thing as the outreach pastor, for you to encourage that, to think about how to help that individual be successful in that, rather than, again, trying to sort of shoehorn that individual into some particular volunteer job or volunteer slot in the church's ministry. What about open-handedly encouraging that member of your flock to go ahead and run for the school board, because they then would be in one of those positions of influence that really affects these upstream causes of the very things that your kids in Kids Zone are struggling with. So once again, I would invite you to take out that handout and look at those on-ramps 4, 5, 6, and 7, and brainstorm, again, either about what some examples of these on-ramp serving roles might be in a current outreach ministry that your church is involved in, or to brainstorm, well, what could some of those types of serving roles look like in this new ministry that we are hypothesizing getting into at the end of Charity to Change. All right, well, I hope those brainstorming times were really fruitful for you, and that this notion of the 7 on-ramps has kind of expanded your imagination for the different ways that folks in your congregation can be involved in the ministries that you've currently got going, and any new outreach ministry that you might end up getting started in as a result of participating in Charity to Change. We've covered a lot of ground in these 3 sessions of Unit 7. I hope that you have found these trainings to be practical and useful. And I just want to end with a word of encouragement and a word of challenge. The word of encouragement is, please do take time to asset map your congregation. And I say that because you will be encouraged. You will be heartened by what you find. When you intentionally and systematically count the blessings, count what God has put into your hands, the resources that He has provided to you to steward for His purposes, you will be encouraged. And you need to be aware of what those things are so that you can be deploying them. We need to be good stewards of that which God has placed into our hands. And the word of challenge that I would leave you with is to go ahead and be bold and take some risks as you think about future community ministries. Attempt something that feels like a bit of a stretch. Have faith to believe that God will indeed supply what you need. Get excited about the inventory process and doing the survey and learning about the vocational power of the folks in your congregation, and get excited about casting vision to them about the ways that they can use their very unique and particular skills and talents and networks and influence in some fresh ways to serve Christ and His kingdom. And use those 7 on-ramps to paint a really broad spectrum of ways, of the many different opportunities that folks have for getting involved. Particularly getting involved in ways that really draw upon and leverage those vocational skills and experiences and networks. Again, oftentimes, if people can sort of serve out of their strengths, serve out of their passions, serve out of the experiences that they have had, they will be more joyful volunteers, and they'll be longer lasting volunteers. I really do believe that if you put into practice the things that we have talked about in this unit, you will experience great joy in watching people in your flock get to work in some new ways. And I think you will experience seeing them have the joyful experience of joining King Jesus with their particular passions and personalities and skills in the advancement of Jesus's kingdom. So blessings to you as you move forward. Take care.